Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this CJCM discussion under the theme, Let's Make the 2024 National Elections Climate Justice Elections, should the CJCM contest elections. The coronavirus pandemic laid bare the inefficiencies of a collapsing state. We saw how our health system was unable to deal with the crisis and the stress that it brought. That is because we have a health system characterized by incompetence, crisis, corruption, inefficiency, and maladministration. But the collapse of the healthcare system is just a microcosm of the state under the ANC-led government. People are desperate. Unemployment in the expanded definition is at 42%, and we are seeing a desperate and largely criminalized civil society. Think of the July unrest in 2021. Things are not functioning in several systems, be it our water systems, our food systems, our biodiversity, are at a dangerously precarious level. The 2014 El Nino-induced drought left several towns on the edge of day zero. It worsened the hunger crisis, and it showed us that the ANC-led state is incompetent, cannot play an effective and efficient role. The 2022 April floods, the tornadoes, the droughts in part of the Eastern Cape and in the Maize Belt, in all of these crises, the state has been unable to respond. Unfortunately, with the climate crisis, these crises are not only getting more frequent, they are getting more severe and they are getting more intense. And those least responsible are paying the highest price for the climate crisis. We need to ask ourselves then, can the ANC-led government and the political parties we have now, who do not take the climate crisis seriously, can they deliver a deep and just transition? Can they confront the poly crisis through democratic systemic reforms? And how can we leverage this moment and use our constitutional power to advance the deep just transition and the systemic transformation of our country, confronting the legacies of the past, the poly crisis of today, and creating a livable future for all life? To help us unpack these issues and this discussion, we have Comrade Thulani Bukani, who is the Secretary of the Independent Komani Residents Association, ICORA, which has contested elections in Komani to try and use state power to better people's lives. We have Comrade Davine Cloete, who is a councillor and an activist in the West Coast Food Sovereignty and Solidarity Forum. We have Comrade Awande Buthelezi, who is a researcher and organizer at the Cooperative and Policy Alternative Center. And we have Comrade Vishwas Satgar, who is the board chairperson of COPEC and an activist at the Climate Justice Charter Movement as well. Comrades, you will have 5 to 10 minutes to make your inputs. We will also be launching today the CJCM active document that Vish and Awande are going to speak to. Comrades, you will have 5 to 10 minutes and then to make your presentations, and then we will open it up for discussion. Comrade Davine, I will start with you. You may make your input. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Davine Witboy. I'm a PR counselor for the DA in the Matsikama municipality. The reason why I contest in the municipality is because I'm an activist for 25 years in the rural area of Matsikama, and also I'm part of other social movements in South Africa and also international part of La Via Campesina. The reason why, and sometimes it's difficult for us as activists to participate in party politics, but the problems that we are facing over the years was about our memorandums that we submit, and most of the memorandums end up in the dustbin. And that is one of the reasons that I decided to participate in party politics. The thing is that people will ask, and they did ask me why I contest for the DA. But when we look at the political arena, we find that the best thing for us to get in the center is maybe through the big political parties. And it was a shock for many people, especially people that work along with me in as an activist, and also people was asking the question why I choose to be part of the DA. And I believe it is sometimes a personal decision that we take. But for me, is it to be an activist, to do the things that I was preaching over the years that matters to the communities, and also not to step aside because now you end up with a salary, not to turn my back upon my people. The choice is still, whenever the political party decided to chase me away, that I will stand my ground, because it's about the people, it's about their needs, and it's about how people suffering on the ground level. So that is important for me. Yes, the question is about CJCM. It is a movement that we built from the start, so various organizations. And I believe that whenever we speak about the power of the people, yes, the power lies upon the communities and in the movements that we built over the years. But the question I always ask myself is, are we ready to take the next step, to step into politics? Yes, we look at what happened in Brazil. At the end of the day, there is always people that make their own choices. Even I was speaking last week, we have a conversation about the elections, especially national election, where a few years ago, we decided not to go and vote because we have the slogan of no land, no vote. But after the election, we had a meeting, and I was asking the activists just to show their thumb, because we have the mark on the thumb. And all of them went to they go and vote. And only me that was intervening with media, who said no land, no vote. I didn't go to vote, but people go, and for them it was, yeah, it's a choice to go and vote. Yes, it's important that we need political parties to put forward the what we said. It is important for communities, but as I say, is it the right time for us to step forward? Because if we want to participate into um, the elections, we have to do our work or mobilization long before. We need to ask people, is it important for a social movement to step forward and participate in the election? What we also experience, because the DA wasn't the only party I participate in. There were other smaller parties that we decided we're going to join. But after the election, we see that the political party just collapsed. So this is one of the reasons that make me sometimes curious to allow or said that social movement must become now a political party. So yeah, but for me, it's just to continue with my work in the community, to allow people to have freedom of association, and not tell people you need to now put your powers together and maybe form a new political party to take us forward. Yes, we see that the struggle that we are having with big political parties, especially the current ruling party, National, it's a big, I can say, a disaster, because after 1994, we believe that the ANC is a the moon and the stars for us, we will have a better life. But the thing is, down the lane, we did see that our eyes were opened by the things that happened around us. But for the Constitution states clearly that people have the right to choose wherever they want to be part of a political party or wherever they want, just to stand aside. But I believe strongly that the power lies in the communities, in the movements, because I can take examples what happened when we start with African Food Sovereignty Campaign, where we join other social movements and have a collective solidarity action. We did see what happened with the Guptas. Our eyes were open, especially when it comes to mining, to land, and all things. So in our actions that we have and engagement that we have with other with academia, with the social movement, with the exchange visit, we as activists grow very, very strong. And I think that this is one of the things currently that even in the municipality now, where I am a councillor, it is one of the threats for many people, because all of a sudden they just see me as a councillor, but they see me as an radical, and yes, I can say militant activist, and not in the arena as a councillor. But for me, is the one thing. It's about our communities. It's about our people, especially about our women and youth. So this is important for me, and I don't think that my mindset will change because about the position that I have currently. It's as I say, it's about a choice. Wherever you are put in that position, yes, you can be removed, but it's about our beliefs, what we believe and what we want to take forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Davine. You've raised so many crucial points that I'm sure will come out in our discussions. I mean, the memorandums have not worked, the symbolic protests have not worked, the lobbying has not worked, the state has continued to be silent, and those with political power have simply not listened to activists. And indeed, you are right when you say you got engaged in this for the sake of the community. Thank you so much, Comrade. We will take it further in the discussion. Comrade Thulani, over to you to make your 5 to 10 minute input.
Okay, thank you very much, Comrade Charles. Greetings, everyone who is in the meeting. I'm Thulani Bukani from Eastern Cape in the town called Komani or Queenstown. So I'm an activist in the organization that is called ICORA. It's Independent Komani Residents Association. So our local municipality, it's Inoki Mgijima. So for me, the question of CJCM should be involved in elections. The conditions and the situations that we see ourselves in as communities with the current government, it tells you that we need new politics. We are in need of a system change. So as ICORA, we've been involved in a series of mass action, in a series of peaceful march where we've been submitting memorandum. Some of them have been not only critiquing the system, but they've been providing even solution, especially the one we did with the CJCM. There was solutions in the memorandum as well, where even the mayor was convinced that if those proposed solutions were to be implemented, there will be a solution in terms of many challenges that we are faced with on the ground. But there was never any invitation to a formal meeting where they promised they will invite us to sit down and discuss further those proposed solutions. So that alone tells you that the current government has no interest on the development of the community, has no interest on the well-being of the community. All that they are doing is to enrich themselves. So even when you look at their conferences, what they get to agree on as a conference resolution, it's not what is implemented on the ground. So that alone tells you that these conferences are just something that purport to be a discussion for people, whereas there's nothing about the people for the people in those conferences. So to me, those things are the indication that we need a new politics that will change the system, because with the current system, we are not going anywhere. We are not getting anything at all. We are just, the situation is just getting worse everywhere. If you go to Joburg, if you go to Cape Town, it's worse in the Eastern Cape. Things are getting worse like every day. So for me, it's not a question of what is the individual thing, but the situation around us tells us that we need a new politics that will change the system. Because with the current system, the current government is not willing to listen to anyone. Even if you go there with a peaceful march, with mobilizing all the communities, those people will just listen to you reading the memorandum. They won't even bother to invite you back to engage you based on the memorandum that you have submitted. That alone tells you a story. So for me, it's just a matter of how much work we have done on the ground so that the CJCM can be participating on the elections. Because really, especially the forces of the left, the country lacks that alone. Because if you look around, even amongst us as activists, if you look around our communities, the current government has even killed the political consciousness among the people. People has no sense of what is right and what is wrong, most of them. You will see people, even now, for an example, you see emerging political parties. When those people approach you, for example, in the ICORA, we've been approached by many of them. When they approach us, they don't come with a program or with a document that is outlining their program. They will come to us and say, we are going to give you this position. We want you to be our provincial chairperson. We want you to be our secretary in the province. We want to field you in parliament. And then you ask all these questions. What is it that you want to field me for in these programs? Now, that alone tells you that the political consciousness in our people have just died, killed by the current system, because our people now, we have starved to a point where what comes first is where our next meal will come from. It's no longer about political consciousness. We've been approached by more than 5 new political parties in the ICORA. Those people, none of them was speaking about their program. They were only speaking about the positions that they are willing to give us. Even the Operation Tutula, we were shocked when we were called by them wanting to meet us, but we refused flatly. But what I'm getting at is that if we are going to be delaying and delaying and delaying, we are going to find ourselves with no country to hand over to our children, to our grandchildren, and all of that. Because the current government is just taking and taking from the poor of the poorest. So that is the situation we find ourselves in. So here in Inokim Kijima, for an example, we have a situation whereby they deployed the administrator, and then the administrator that was deployed only released a preliminary report, and then they were so unhappy with the preliminary report, and then they chased him out. He ended up having about 8 bodyguards, and then they deployed the administrator of their choice after. And then the same administrator they have chosen themselves, they were unhappy when he released a report about what is going on in our municipalities, where you find ghost workers, where you find people who are employed with no qualifications at all in the municipality. And then you ask what kind of service delivery is going to be rendered to the communities if the people who are there, they don't even know, they don't even have a capacity to occupy those offices. Recently, the police were called upon us because we've been going to the office of the mayor, local mayor here, because there was no electricity, there was no water, there was just nothing at all. The road that they were doing, that is coming from town to Esbeleni, the contract that was doing the road there, they just stopped without even informing the community what was going on. So we went there to ask clarity on those issues. And then the mayor was nowhere to be found, even though we have made several appointments. And then on the 3rd appointment, they failed to show up. We decided to stage a sit-in in his office until the next morning. Then the next morning, they called police on us to arrest us. And then we were willing to comply with the police. We went to the van because they said we are under arrest. In fact, they first gave us about 5 minutes to say we must decide if we want to go out of the office and leave the premises of the mayor's office, or we stay there until they finish up to open the case against us. And then we said, no, we are going to wait until the municipality guys are done with the case. Then they said, we only give you 5 minutes. We said, it's fine. Then after 5 minutes, they say we are under arrest. We just stood up peacefully and went to the van. It was about 3 vans. Those 3 vans were full. And then they didn't want to close the van now, even though all of us, we were inside the vans. And then they, after some few squabbles there, they ended up saying, no, the guy is no longer opening a case against us. Then they are going to allow us to go peacefully. And then we went off the van, we came back home. The following morning, we went to the police station to open a case for them, because one of them was the one who was the captain. I just forget his name. So he was being rude and all of that, shouting at us, pushing around the females that we were with. So we had to open a case for them. And then the brigadier intervened. Remember, by all this time, the mayor is not available to sit down with these communities that we were there with. They will rather have us arrested than engaging us. So even though this thing was happening, so the brigadier came, because those were at the police stations. They said they cannot open a case for this guy because this guy is their senior. So it must have, there must be someone who is senior than him to open a case. And then we waited for him, the brigadier, the following day. He phoned us. Then we meet at the local police station here. And then he asked what was the problem. We explained to him what happened. And then he tried to contact the mayor they were not answering their phones, and then he called the provincial government to explain what was happening here locally, because he saw it that these police were used on a political agenda. So that is when we finally got to have the mayor to listen to us through that brigadier. So that alone tells you the situation that we find ourselves in, because if it was someone else who was not willing to go all the way to open cases, how was the community going to engage with the mayor? Because remember, here we are his constituency. When his constituents wants to engage him, it shouldn't be a difficult exercise, but we had to go all these difficult channels just to have the mayor to listen to us. When he is actually failing to deliver or on his duties in the community. So those things alone are the clear indication that we really need a new government that will be the government of the people, that will listen to the people, that will render the service that is expected by the communities on the ground. So, but even when we engage with him, there was no, there's nothing that we got from him. Because the challenge of the electricity, the challenge of water, and the challenge of roads that are bad in our communities are still the same. They only delivered a transformer for the electricity. So that is the only thing, because here we were experiencing load shedding and load reduction. So we were only now immune to load reduction after the transformer was installed and connected. That is the only thing that was achieved by those actions, but not because of anything, but it's because of these people. They care less about their jobs, they care less about the community. All they do is corruption and corruption and corruption. So for me, there's no question about whether we need there's a need for a contestation of elections around. That one goes without saying. There is a need for a new politics. There is a need for a change of system, because we cannot change system without the road that passed through the ballot papers. That is the only way we can be able to change the system, of which it is an urgent need for us to change this system, because it's not working for any of us on the ground. It's only working for those who are in power, for those who are rich. So for the poor of the poorest, it's actually destroying them even more. Because
Thank you, comrade.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Comrade Charles.
Thank you so much, Comrade Thulani. You'll have an opportunity to expand on all those important points you raised during the discussion.
Okay, no problem, Comrade. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade. Comrade Awande, over to you.
Thank you, Charles. And good evening, everyone. Apologies, I'm just dealing with some network issues, so I'm going to keep my camera off for now so that I'm audible. I think that the point in which this conversation has reached has also given a lot of perspective with regards to some of the more intricate issues around the issue of formal politics in South Africa right now. But I am going to bring perspective with regards to where the CJCM has come from and where the CJCM is right now, and why this kind of thinking and debate or discussion around this electoral moment is very necessary, particularly given the work and the perspective that the CJCM has had. And you know, the work of the CJCM, or the Climate Justice Charter movement, has grown out of the campaigning work of COPAC, the Cooperative and Policy Alternative Center, and the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign, particularly beginning from the period of the drought in 2014, all the way through to the early COVID period of 2020, 2021. And the charter, in and of itself, coming out as the world's first proper charter setting out a plurivision that wants to address the legacies of apartheid, the current poly crisis, and also putting forward a just and democratic future, has been growing and has been endorsed by 282 organizations. And in the process of this journey of COPAC's work, the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign's work, and the Climate Justice Charter movement, we have tried in numerous ways to engage with the government, the ANC government, and all the political parties who supposedly represent us in national parliament. And we've tried many ways in which to communicate the urgency of putting our country on a democratic climate emergency footing. We've pushed and campaigned to raise the alarm and to make clear the way in which the climate crisis and the poly crisis is worsening, and the way in which it's going to affect our country, particularly also due to the failed leadership of the ruling party and other political parties that represent us. In 2015, during the work of the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign, within the context of the drought, hunger tribunals were held to speak about the worsening food crisis. In 2016, there were drought speakouts, bread marches. In 2018, the People's Food Sovereignty Act being taken to Parliament with the vision of a new food system, given the collapse of commercial agricultural system during the drought. In 2018, the IPCC released its special report on 1.5 degrees, which was calling on governments to cut emissions by at least 45% by 2030. That was all the way back there. We are now 5 years into the future, and the date of 2030 keeps getting closer and closer. And during that period, we called on the president to convene an emergency sitting of parliament to discuss what this means for our country and its state of preparedness for the oncoming effects of the climate crisis. In 2019, we developed the Climate Justice Charter through bottom-up dialogues, which took place, which grew and developed into the finalized charter that we have today. And in 2020, on October 16th, World Food Day, we had our engagement with Parliament. We reached out, and we had that engagement, to all the political parties. There was lack of buy-in from them or response, some of them only responding after the fact and after we'd had this engagement with Parliament. We took the Climate Justice Charter, we took the memorandum and the climate science document, which had been prepared by some of the foremost climate scientists in our country, warning about the effects of the climate crisis to Parliament. And in our memorandum, we also demanded from communities, taking that demand from communities to end climate harm, corruption, thirst, pollution, and hunger. In 2021, we returned to Parliament. We had our action outside of Parliament to hold Parliament accountable for the lack of feedback that we received from them following our engagement in 2020. Emphasizing the challenge of what we'll be facing in our context, but globally, and the importance of adopting the CJC. In 2020, we charged the president and others for the deaths of people due to the climate-related rain bomb in KZN. In 2023, this year, we celebrated the third year anniversary of the Climate Justice Charter at the end of August 28th, and we called on the president once again to place the country on a democratic climate emergency footing, given the continued forecast of leading climate scientists and the way in which we have failed to prepare for the worst of these climate impacts that we'll be facing. Also, we are heading into summer, so that's also another indication of how this continues to steamroll and snowball into something that is just growing and growing and growing as a ticking time bomb, which our government has failed to deal with. So these are all examples of the ways in which we have tried and thought around creatively of engaging with the states democratically as people who are not represented and as perspectives that are not represented in the states. We've tried in many ways to engage with the ruling party, and we've been ignored by the ANC government, and we've been ignored by mainstream political parties. So the work of the Climate Justice Charter movement and the work that all activists in this space and all people who have done the various kinds of work that has brought us to this moment is far too important for us to sit back and allow it to, fall apart just because it is not being heard by the failed political leadership of this country. The democratic climate emergency footing that we require has to be mainstreamed. We require that perspective to be put on the table of formal South African political processes, particularly in this election moment. In March this year, we had a national conference which drew on the strategic conclusions with regards to the state of climate politics and struggle in this country. Some of the things that came out of that were that the UN multilateral process, including the Paris Agreement, is failing, human and non-human life. It's failing and has failed. That there's a crisis of leadership, including within most national states, not just ours. Fossil fuel capital has effectively delayed the phasing out of fossil fuels for almost 3 decades. They're putting us on a worse trajectory, and emissions and investments in fossil fuels continue to increase despite the necessity of acting now, immediately, that date that was set in 2018 by the IPCC, drawing closer and closer and closer. And the global energy mix right now still stays heavily skewed towards fossil fuels. And if you're following what's happening globally right now, particularly in Europe, you can see that that set of circumstances is not going to change anytime soon. The failure to address the climate crisis over the past 3 decades has put us on an eco-fascist course, if you're following what's been happening in global politics, but also locally, in particularly with regards to the context of climate chaos and breakdown becoming ever more and more prescient, with great harm and loss of life, and this becoming the continued lived reality that we're living in terms of the climate impact that we've already begun to see. And in South Africa, you've seen also the way in which the carbon nationalists have come out, to merge with the green neoliberal faction within our current states, particularly that which is seen in the Presidential Climate Commission. There's the paradox of these two things taking place within the ruling party, these two perspectives of this green neoliberal faction, but also this carbon nationalist. So this is also part of the problem which we have with regards to our leadership in terms of, walking left and right at the same time. It's leading us nowhere. And I think in the past 2 years in particular, or should I say the past 3 years, with regards to the rain bombs, floods, storm surges that we've been experiencing, you can see that the unpreparedness for these impacts is something which is no longer just a projection in line with the climate science and the context of what we're facing. It's becoming more and more the reality of what many communities in this country are already experiencing. The ANC's failed market democracy has also been very exclusionary from the onset of this democracy. It's given power over to capital, and in combination with the crisis of corruption that we faced, it's intensified criminalization within our states. That's something that we also have to contend with. And political parties in this country have really failed to really grapple with, these various crises. So this is just to say that, we have to also keep these things at the forefront of our mind when thinking about this moment, when we're thinking about how do we engage with this moment and the necessity of why, the Climate Justice Charter movement's perspectives and its vision have to really be put into the formal processes of this country's political landscape. We have to mainstream these perspectives for the benefit of allowing our politics in this country to move into a more beneficial position to help us deal with these issues. But also to say that the Climate Justice Charter movement is not a political party, but we really need to find ways to ensure that climate justice mass politics that is put in the vision of the Charter finds its way into the mainstream, right? This is just another way to say that, but it is necessary to emphasize that we aren't a political party, though. And the CJCM has 4 strategies to confront the poly crisis. If you've read the strategic perspective documents, if you engaged with our work over the years, it is clear that these things come out through the work that we've done, and also the perspectives of all the different work in which the activists of the Climate Justice Charter movement have done, which is to build an international bloc of vulnerable governments, peoples, workers, and movements, securing a climate justice deal and a worker-driven democratic climate emergency states, to deepen democracy through fighting corruption and renewing our constitutional democracy project, and also to build a people and worker-driven movement grounded in a new paradigm that builds, transforms, and shifts power to accelerate the deep, just transition in communities, workplaces, and sectors. As a worker and people-driven movement, we also require and we believe that transformation must be grounded in the political program of transformative politics, which we do not see in the country right now. We need to provide the content and the ideas for a deep, just transition. So we have to fight from below for a democratic systemic reforms. And that means that we have to engage and find ways to put these perspectives that we have onto the mainstream, onto the national discourse. So the electoral tactic that we're speaking about or bringing forward tonight, and we are trying to engage with and deliberate over, is one which we envisage, that expresses a level of tactical flexibility to take forward, the Climate Justice Charter movement strategies and its political program into the democratic mainstream. So it's about testing, a movement party framework or function of the Climate Justice Charter movement to confront this current crisis of political leadership that we're facing in this country, which is only going to face a worsening poly and climate crisis that is going to impact further our state, our society, and economy. So while, some voices have already argued for the Climate Justice Charter movement to become a green party because South Africa doesn't really have anything of that sort in its political mainstream or setup, the majority view, though, supports the current strategic and programmatic institutional direction that the Climate Justice Charter movement has taken, which is also very important in how the Climate Justice Charter movement has and continues to distinguish itself from being a quote-unquote green party that just wants to modernize and gradually change things. Because the Climate Justice Charter movement is firstly committed to the plurivision of the Charter, which is grounded in the reality of where this country comes from, where this country is, and where we could be going to, where we could be headed. It's also committed to a set of systems change and transformation perspectives which seek to overcome the poly crisis by building democratic systemic reforms. It's committed to emancipatory ecology from below by building the capacity of workers and people to change and end the war with nature, reshaping our relationship with nature. And it's also not about narrowly electoralist politics. It's about creating a new paradigm of transformative power. So that means we have to have this conversation right now in this moment. We have to engage with this question fundamentally and clearly. And yeah, I hope that these perspectives and these inputs contribute to that process.
Thank you so much, Awande. Vish, I'll hand over straight to you.
Okay. Thank you, Charles, and thank you everyone on the panel. Comrade Davine, I know you for almost 10 years, and I know your heart is with the people and not with the DA. And so thank you for your input. I must also emphasize to this audience that despite Comrade Davine becoming a DA councillor, she still lives in the informal settlement, and she works in a very intimate way with her people. Comrade Thulani provoked us when he said, we won't have a country with the current politics. And I think that's really also mirrored in the kind of analysis that Comrade Awande has shared with us about the worsening poly crisis, the crisis of institutional politics in South Africa, the distance between leaders and led, and essentially an unresponsive political class in this country. So why an electoral tactic in 2024 for the national elections? And as Awande says, we are not a party. We're a people and worker-driven movement. That's how we've been building the CJCM, and we're really about accelerating the just transition from below. But given the conjuncture, given the realities that we're up against, and a failing sort of ruling class. These are some of the specific reasons for a CJCM electoral tactic next year. One, place the urgency of the climate crisis at the center of South African society. In 5 or 10 years' time, it will be too late with a 1.5 degrees Celsius global overshoot, which will place South Africa at 3 degrees Celsius. This will have devastating consequences for a country unprepared. In other words, if we do not intervene in this election and mainstream the narrative of the climate emergency and shake up the political establishment, the political elite in this country is going to continue down the same road and basically take us into a nightmare. The second reason is that we can provide a narrative of systemic alternatives to address the main polycrises of social reproduction. Unemployment, hunger, water crises. Many communities are struggling with water crises, inequality, worsening climate shocks, and rolling blackouts. So the CJCM has been busy over the past actually 3 years since we handed the charter to Parliament of translating the 14 systemic alternatives in the charter into policies for the country. And we want to place those, including the idea of a climate justice deal, which we've done a lot of work, into national discourse. So in other words, we are poised in our October conference to consolidate a democratic, eco-feminist socialist program with answers to this polycrisis. And we'd like that to center our discourse and narrative. The third reason why we think this tactic should be considered is that we need to provide a left alternative to the exclusionary nationalist, xenophobic, criminalized, and narrow liberal mainstream in South Africa. None of the forces rising can give this country a future. The extreme right in this country is going to destroy this democracy. The liberal mainstream, including its fixation on independent candidates and so on, is going to further fragment the political system and institutional political game. They don't have answers to this crisis. So essentially, if we use a tactic to be present, we can have a foothold and present a serious left institutional voice in the institutional political context, and have a positioning that can stand against and push back against the extreme right that is rising and emerging and preying on the desperation of the people in this country. South Africa faces dangerous polarization. And if we just fold our arms and look back and look at the spectacle of this politics, we are essentially destroying our country. The fourth reason is to demonstrate a more ethical, accountable, transparent servant leadership and societal-driven approach to political representation in parliamentary politics, consistent with the Constitution and societal expectations. None of the parties are about this. The CJCM, if it were to go this route, will advance public representation that will work bottom up to relay the voices, concerns, and climate justice alternatives of peoples and workers. This will be very different from the transactional politics of mainstream political parties, who merely harness people's votes and then want people to go back into passivity. This is the new politics that Comrade Bukani is talking about or calling for. And this is really what we are trying to put in place. And fifth, even if electoral representation for the CJCM does not garner electoral support, we believe that if we intervene in these elections and place the climate emergency discourse at the center of these elections, we place the alternatives on the CJCM platform in the elections, we would have informed society. And basically, that would amount to a success in itself. So what are the key aspects of the electoral tactic? Essentially, there's 2 dimensions to it. We're not talking about a maximalist tactic. We're not talking about taking over the government. We're not talking about going toe-to-toe with the ruling party. But we're also not talking about this kind of sideshow of independence and so on. What we are talking about is contesting the election with at least 10 tried and tested activists committed to the climate justice cause and the CJCM, and attempt to get them into parliament. And this slate should be intergenerational, gender-informed, race-based, and class-informed as well. The second aspect of this electoral tactic is that we will campaign on the climate justice platform of the CJCM and will profile the key policies that we've developed to address the worsening poly and climate crisis, climate jobs for unemployment, food sovereignty to address hunger, eco-mobility to address the transport crisis in this country, socially and community-owned renewable systems, etc. There are answers. We will construct a narrative against the crisis of leadership that's worsening the policy crisis and advance climate justice alternatives. So 2 legs on which the tactic walks, 10 tried and tested activists, mixed in terms of various criteria, plus our climate justice charter movement policy platform. And we present alternatives in response to the crisis of leadership. So finally, there are some key tasks if we want to go this route, and they will have to unfold simultaneously. The incoming National Coordinating Committee will have to finalize these candidates. There'll have to be fundraising initiatives from donors, supporters, and the public. And this to be done in a transparent and accountable way consistent with South African law. We'll have to meet Independent Electoral Commission technical requirements. There's various things here. If you have to register for the election, pay a fee. If you do the tactic we want to, we'll need 300,000 rands, and we'll need further endorsements. And then finally, we'll need a phased campaign plan from our October conference till the elections. To launch our electoral platform and candidates, key campaign messages, media interventions, voter mobilization tactics, and monitoring, and essentially building a campaign machinery. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you so much, Comrade Vish. Thank you to our panelists for their inputs. Comrades, it's now open. You can raise your hand and I will allow you to speak. Or you can post your questions in the chat, but you are more than welcome to please raise your hands. There are some 2 questions in the chat from Shelley. One has to do with discussions with other political parties about putting forward a candidate. And then the other one is the sentiment on the ground, how people are understanding the climate crisis. But maybe you can respond to Shelley as you also respond to Janet. Janet, you can please unmute.
Hello, Charles. Do you want me to speak now?
Yes, Janet, may speak now.
Oh, great. No, thanks. So thanks for this really, really interesting discussion. I hope it can be more of a discussion than a sort of question and answer session. So I thought Thulani's input was really interesting. And I mean, we know Komani, that municipality, the governance of Queenstown has been dysfunctional and corrupt for more than a decade. I think, you know, having Ikora, having a residents association which is engaging in that way is really absolutely to be admired. And so I'm interested in cases where community-based, real community-based organizations have adopted an electoral strategy. And I'm thinking of the Makana Citizens Forum, which made, I mean, I remember discussing this a couple of years ago after the local government election, where they'd made some quite significant gains there. And I've had some recent engagement with them as well. And I'm interested in whether we distinguish between local and national government in terms of an electoral strategy, and why the CJC movement and other climate activists and community activists more broadly have not adopted this at local level. And is that not strategically the way to start, i.e. where you can get, because of the system itself, where you can actually win a ward seat. If you have strong organization in a ward, you can win a ward seat, as some NUMSA comrades did in Kariga some years ago, in KwaNobuhle. And also where in a local government, you can actually have the balance of power. I mean, you can have one seat like Kuster Jack has in Nelson Mandela Bay, or he had, and it can be absolutely decisive. So because that system is structured differently at local level, it offers a different strategic opportunity. And I don't think that our movements have really tested that at that level at all. So I think, I mean, what Vish was putting forward in terms of the national election is absolutely valid in terms of, you know, a strategy with what he calls tactical flexibility to test and to gain some. Sorry, he's telling me they're lowering my hand. Okay, so some gains through the putting forward that alternative in Parliament. I think there are some gains to be made through that, but it's not clear to me whether this is based in a real testing at local level, which I would, you know, I would think it's, you know, it's still more symbolic than having access to power. If we haven't been able to influence policy through the ways in which we work to date, is it going to, I mean, I suppose it does, being in Parliament, even if you have a couple of seats in Parliament, it does give some access to parliamentary committees to influence policy at that level, which is important. What I was going to reflect on was, okay, one of the other things that Thulani said was we need a new politics, i.e. the system itself is not working. And yet what Vishwas is putting forward is essentially based on an acceptance of the liberal democratic system, which is what we're working within. And that is then combined with what he calls a transformative politics from below. But the importance of playing within that liberal democratic space, I completely agree with. I mean, I think we have to do that. But if you say the system doesn't work, we need to change the system, that is a fundamentally different proposition. It's not accepting the liberal democratic space as the space we must test. So I wanted Thulani to respond to that. Is he really talking about the system, or is he talking about the current governing party in that system? And then the last point was just, I don't know if people saw a video which has been distributed of Thabo Mbeki at some meeting talking about responding to another analyst about state failure and how, in fact, what's happened in South Africa, what is happening as we speak, and this is specifically in the energy sector, but not only in energy, it's also in security, in education, in health, is that the private sector is actually taking over. And they argue, this analyst who Thabo Mbeki is quoting, is saying, actually, the private sector plus civil society are coming up with solutions because the state is not doing it. So I think it's just an interesting analysis to feed into the debate, because can left civil society fill that gap at a grassroots level, and can it provide solutions? You know, we talk about, you know, our food sovereignty campaigns and renewable community-owned renewable energy and so on. Can we actually do that and not focus on the central state? Say, well, okay, let's leave the central state. And I think Vishwas will respond to this, because I know we've had some debate about, should we still be focusing on the central state? I mean, why don't we have more of a sort of autonomous position? And I'm just throwing this into the discussion because I think we have to address these issues. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Janet, for those questions. I'm sure our panelists were taking note of them. Comrade Thulani, maybe I can start with you. You can also reflect on how you have tested this tactic at a local level.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Charles. Yes, for me, I think we need to decolonize the system first, because even the way, for an example, here at local level, the way the communities interact with the municipality. For an example, it's easy, for example, to put someone there through the vote. But when the community is not happy with that individual, that is a ward councillor or PR councillor, maybe through the votes of the people. The process that the community had to embark on to recall that person, it makes it impossible for the community to achieve that. So for me, that alone need to be changed. Hence, I'm talking about the change of the system at all, because the current system now, it only works for few individuals, for elites and stuff, not for the people on the ground. And also it works for people who have money, who can afford to get lawyers to represent them in courts. For those who don't have money, are under a bullyism of the ones who are rich, of the ones who are in power and stuff. And just to add more, so for me, it's not just to have about, because to have about just one seat. We need a movement that will be powerful enough to come close if it does not unseat the current ruling party. Because if we have the current ruling party in place, or we are to have just one seat, that seat would be bullied by the majority of the ruling party. So hence I was asking the question of, I was saying, for me, it's not a question of whether there should be a contestation of the power, but the question is that how much work has been done on the ground to ready the people for the new politics of the left.
Thank you so much, Comrade Thulani. Vish, maybe you want to come in and respond to Janet's point on the central state. And maybe as you respond to Janet, Vish, you can also respond to Shirley, the discussions that the CJCM has been having on this issue for several years, and also the feeling on the ground, how the nation is understanding the climate crisis and what people are thinking. Yeah, over to you, Vish.
Okay, thanks. And others should also add. Just to respond first to Shirley, actually. I'm not aware of a survey around where people are. I know a few years ago there was surveys done, and most South Africans were not even informed about the climate crisis. But if you look at what's happened, at least over the past 4 or 5 years, there's a shift in terms of the lived realities of climate shocks. We saw this during the drought in the context of day zero work at different levels, whether we occupied the sort of attempted to occupy the Sunday Times office or the SANEF offices, etc. The activists that came through that process, they were making the connections. The South African Food Sovereignty Campaign was making the connections to the climate crisis, etc. I think the rain bombs, I think the surges we've seen now, the extreme storm in Cape Town, all of this has unsettled South Africa. And so I really think that there is a growing awareness around this. Linked to this is the media. When we started kind of pushing the media, there wasn't much climate reporting. We had the Burning Planet and maybe 1 or 2 other kind of media houses picking up on stuff. But there was a smattering of reporting. But increasingly, and particularly after we had the workshop with SANEF, etc., we've noticed some shifts in the media. It has a long way to go to have like a dedicated focus on climate. But that has also been impacting, I would argue, sort of public perception, public understanding, and so on. I don't think we should premise our approach to climate with the idea that the people are ignorant in this country. They're not. And I think that as deep just transition work happens and it churns up engagements from below, I think there's a growing public awareness. But this thing has to be tested. I think this is what's interesting about this question. I mean, one way to test it is to put forward a climate justice platform in the elections that speaks to the poly crisis, not narrowly climate, but speaks to unemployment, that speaks to inequality, that speaks to hunger, etc., which is what our climate justice approach has been about. I think the point about discussion with other movements, yes, we've been talking to various organizations. We've been talking to community-based organizations. Some of them are on this webinar today. We've been talking to youth groups. We've been talking to student activists involved in climate justice politics, the faith-based communities. We've also been talking to some more prominent sort of activist personalities, from Mark Hayward to Kumi Naidu, etc. We've been talking to, at our protest outside the Cape Town Convention Center recently, we gathered with a few Extinction Rebellion comrades, and I shared with them that this is some of the ideas that we kind of testing and putting up for further debate. But the long and short of it is that this conversation will continue. We're launching this document today, and we will be sending out to all organizations that have endorsed the charter. There's 280 something organizations, and we're going to be inviting feedback. We're putting it on our blog, and we want comrades to engage with that this document and give us their views. Finally, just to say very quickly, you know, we are in a context in which we still have a state, and the state is still powerful in South Africa with all its problems. It wields resources, it has capacities, and so on. And what we've seen in our pathway building work, and for me, it begins before the Climate Justice Charter movement, whether it's around solidarity economy work in Ivory Park, for example, where, you know, I had, you know, sort of prohibited from going back there, and other people I worked with had death threats, you know, working in a community and really trying to unleash a logic of transformative politics. You always come up against the power structure, okay? So that's been one experience. The food sovereignty campaign, whenever we try to test things, and even with the acts taking to parliament, there's never been a kind of shift happening. So you have this power structure that's impervious, it's not responsive, and it's really disabling in so many ways. So the state is there, and the question is are we just going to let it slide further into this mold? Are we going to let the state become a full-blown authoritarian state? I think that's a question we all have to grapple with. It's not going to be enough to have our islands of deep democracy. As long as we have the state in front of us, we're going to have to democratize it. And I think this is what the nuance is in our position, is continue doing the work from below, continuing pushing the pathway work, but at the same time leveraging the state and even, as I said, democratizing it and embedding it again, and sort of redirecting it. I mean, if the state collapses in South Africa, which is a scenario, by the way, it has been collapsing in some locales, in some contexts. I mean, the state is absent. The state is completely disengaged. It's corrupt. It's dead. In those contexts, there's opportunities to go further. So I really think that we need to, again, be flexible and be able to test frontiers, test conditions and context. And this is the kind of debate we're having in the Climate Justice Charter movement. And this is what this intervention is all about. Thank you.
Vish, thank you so much. Perhaps before I go to Erwin, Comrade Davine, maybe you also want to reflect on how communities in the West Coast are making the connection with the climate crisis, and also Awande, you'd like to on the various engagements that you've been having with several communities and talking to different people. Yeah, Comrade Davine and then Comrade Awande, and then I'll go to Erwin in the attendees.
Yeah, Charles. As Comrade Janet did reflect on, highlighting the local elections Yes, it's important for us to get our step into the local government, because most of the people, they mostly, the first door that they want to enter is the local government, the municipalities, because of all the problems we are facing in the communities. And currently we see that people struggling, people suffer because of a lack of service delivery. But the problem also that we need to emphasize on is also what Comrade Thulani was mentioned. How many seats will we have? Because the end of the day, and even now with the discussion of political parties, national is whenever they will get that the 50%, 50 plus 1% or 52% of votes, because for them is this coming election, national election, will be very, very. I think we gonna have a very surprise uh, election, because the ANC want to still be in governance, and also um, most of the political party feel that the ANC need to go. So they will find ways maybe to go into coalitions. And if we as a climate justice charter movement become part of politics, it is very important to think about, are we gonna going into coalition with other political parties whenever we have the seats, because people lost their faith in the communities, because what they experience is will have a ripple effect on the elections, because some people feel that they are not going to vote. Other people feel that it is important to vote. So now it is an interesting period that we enter. But for me, is to be in local government is for me very important, because when you are part of when you are council at local government, um, you will be part of portfolios. Even I'm on the environmental portfolio. Even today we have this Satgar discussion about the inaugural international good practice and knowledge management for disaster risk reduction and climate change. So there is it important for us to step in and make a mark, or whatever we discuss, just to put it through that channel. But yes, it's going to be very interesting whether people are going to the voting station in 2024 or just stay away and focus on local government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Davine. Awande?
Thanks, Charles. I'm not going to say too much at the risk of just repeating what the other panelists have said, but it's just to pick up and reiterate on the point that Vish had made in response to Shirley's question, in that, you know, highlighting or blaming ignorance cannot or shouldn't be the primary tactic with regards to how we engage and bring, you know, climate justice perspectives into the political arena or the political landscape of the country, in light of next year's elections, but even beyond that. You know, in the various engagements that I've had throughout the year, but you know, throughout the years, but particularly this year, in this current moment, prior to next year's elections, there's an overwhelming, you know, sense that despite the disaffection that people have with the way in which politics in this country have been managed, or in the ways in which they've played out, and the lack of representation that people feel they have to support truly transformative perspectives from what is on offer from our, you know, main political parties, given that the country has a lot of political parties. It's not the number of parties that is the issue, it's the number of perspectives on offer that reflects the reality of what people are experiencing in this country, but also some kind of, comprehensive understanding of ways in which we can truly find our way out of it. I think that, this election in particular, and why this discussion right now is such an important discussion, particularly from the perspective of, climate justice activism, and the type of activism that the CJCM has put forward, one which is grounded in the reality, the material reality of our country, its past and its present, and what, failed political leadership means with regards to how much worse that material reality will move towards in the future. There's a greater responsibility, I feel, thrust on us, particularly as climate justice activists, to find ways of putting these demands and these issues on the table. I think that, given where we've been in the recent, the recent past, politically in this country, like the way in which things have developed in the past couple of years, for us to not find a way in any way, but not for us to not find a way to use this moment to put these issues on the table, to be able to find ways to communicate effectively the importance of what we represent and what we are fighting for on the table, I think would be, a kind of almost a dereliction of duty on our part, as climate justice activists, particularly from the perspective of the CJCM. If we don't do this, if we don't fight for these perspectives in the mainstream, then who will? I think that is part of the requirements of our activism. So just to say that this is also a means of addressing and, putting forward for those who are, clamoring for genuinely transformative perspectives to be put on, on the table. This is something we can offer in that way by putting these perspectives forward.
Thank you so much, Awande. Davine, you can please unmute.
Okay. Hi, yeah, I had a question that confuses me a lot following the news, like maybe it's mainstream news of today, but it made me very curious about the position that the Climate Justice Charter movement has on foreign policy. I understand that like climate change is all about scaling down and we must work more on the local level. So I understand, like also from the perspective of electoral politics, that you focus on local issues. But I'm following international news and I see some trends and yeah, you talk about eco-fascism, but I also noticed like in Africa, there's this countries that take a very assertive position now against Western imperialism with the resource nationalism, where countries are really saying like, we don't want our resources be used and just be taken away by former imperialist powers, current imperialist powers, basically, like Burkina Faso and Niger, and we want our resources to be used for local for the local benefits, and that sounds very much in tune with what green policies would also promote. But just in the case of South Africa, a lot of these resources involve coal, of course. So that's ultimately a resource that cannot be used if you go for a truly green, but there are resources that may be useful for greener technologies. So I was really wondering what yeah, maybe it's not a definite answer, but is the Climate Justice Charter thinking about international policy and foreign policy and also alignment with BRICS, for example, that are trying to undermine the power of the dollar worldwide, which I think is also really undermining sovereignty of countries like South Africa, because a lot of policies are dictated by international institutions like the World Bank and all that. So yeah, just maybe it's just a lot of space to also start thinking, and it's very different from the local politics. But I was wondering whether there is some movement on that issue as well. Hello?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Erwin, for your question. Decoloniality is one of the principles for a deep, just transition that we have in the Climate Justice Charter movement. Perhaps Awande, you would like to say more to Erwin about building a global climate justice bloc of governments, of movements, of progressive forces as well. And there's also a question on the chat that has been raised by Mahadi on how do we deal with the issue of people who are disinterested in politics. It's something that came up with Comrade Thulani as well when he was talking about the de-radicalized society that we have. But perhaps, Comrade Awande, you can kick it off by talking about the global climate justice bloc of governments, of movements that the CJCM talks about.
Thank you, Charles. Yeah, I think Erwin's question is one which it reflects the kind of necessity of having, this climate justice politics front and center. Because as Charles was saying, one of the principles of the deep just transition, but also of the in the Climate Justice Charter itself, is of decolonization, but also internationalism and renewing radical Pan-Africanism. So I think that, in contention with all these issues that Erwin is putting forward right now with regards to the international context, it's as important that we have this, decolonial perspective, this radical Pan-African perspective, and this internationalist thrust, because fundamentally, the issue is a local issue in the sense of how we experience it and the way in which we're impacted by it, but it's also partly made through these international factors and these global considerations. So this is part of why this is also necessary, because we have to offer something different to what we're currently, being given. I think also in terms of how we relate to each other, just regionally and continentally, also has a lot in how it can impact our ability to deal with these worsening crises. And we need to be put on a different footing or a different trajectory in ways to build not just local resilience, but regional and continental resilience also. So part of the necessity of mainstreaming, the CJCM perspectives is also to offer a new dimension in terms of how we respond to international politics, beginning with the regional, continental, but also in how we can offer something in terms of how we, as a continent, respond to these changing factors. I think an example of that is also with regards to our country's position with regards to its climate financing and what it did with the JET IP, the JET IP, and also how we've been engaging with, these multilateral spaces such as the COP, and the direction in which, the resource nationalists, but also the green neoliberal faction within our government has taken, is also putting us in a dangerous footing in the ways in which we are able to have effective agency in how we're going to deal with these issues and this crisis. So this is another, important thing to take into consideration in terms of not just allowing or vacating, agency in how we can voice and communicate these perspectives, and hoping that if we just plant the seed through just us existing and the work that we're doing, that someone will pick this up and be able to speak on these things and challenge effectively what's happening in these spaces. Because, the way in which these things move, we can find ourselves being locked in, not just as a country, but as a region. So a whole set of circumstances with regards to how these crises are dealt with at the international level, which effectively removes our ability to, deal with them fundamentally in a way which is truly transformative, in the way in which people are crying for to be truly transformative.
Thank you so much, Comrade Awande. Janet says in the chat, it's crucial to have a clear position on regional energy, green minerals, regional labor markets, zamazamas, to counter the xenophobic nationalism. It's something that we do talk about in the strategic perspectives. And there's another question by Shelley asking, is the idea to put forward candidates only at national level, or is there a view on provincial and local elections? I realize that we have reached the time, but I will give our panelists an opportunity to respond to these points that have been raised, but also to make their final response, to make their final comments or inputs in this discussion. Comrade Davine, then Comrade Thulani, and then we'll end with Comrade Vishwas. Your final
Yes.
inputs. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, I think it is important to test the ground, but it's also important to respect wherever people decided not to vote for maybe something new. Because in national election, people always think about the big political parties, no matter what thing they are doing and how they disadvantage some of the people on the ground level. But I think it's important to feel the ground. Wherever people feel that they need to vote for a civil society movement, we need to go for it, because people want change. They want to see that there is improve in the situation that they currently face. So that is from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Davine. Comrade Thulani?
Thank you, Comrade Charles. For me, Comrade Charles, I think the issue of that Workers' Party of NUMSA, we should draw some lesson from it as left forces, so that we don't leave some of our comrades. By our comrades, I mean the forces of the left behind. So we need a way of coordinating our work so that we don't go on polls and then have only a few areas that are participating. We need to join hands as the forces of the left to be one powerful bloc, so that we take the system by storm going to the election. We don't want a situation where we will people will go to elections and get lost and also get to be demoralized, because the exercise of contesting election is very strenuous, and people get to be demoralized there and end up not wanting to be active again as a result of getting lost on the ballot papers. So we need to do a very good work on the ground in teaching people on politics of the left, engaging other left forces which we know are existing, engaging other organizations that are existing, so that we move as one big formation. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Thulani. Comrade Vish?
Comrades, thank you for all the comments, inputs, questions, and intervention and document and so on. Just two nationalisms playing themselves out on the continent, created and expressed in South Africa, within the ANC and so on. Carbon-based resources that can still be extracted. For many of these forces, including Mozambique, for many of these forces enriching their societies, but actually these are lumpen bourgeois, actually. They don't have a record of enriching their societies. They've been enriching themselves. So they stand behind these arguments and pretexts and so on to basically ensure some kind of primitive accumulation of these resources. I mean, they even spout anti-imperialist stuff. The West is blocking us, etc., like Montage. But the fact of the matter is that this is not a class project for the benefit of society, but also it's a project that's really at a dead end, given the climate crisis. The other nationalism is a nationalism that's responding to the so-called awakening that Irvin was referring to, including in Namibia, by the way, where the allied movements there are saying no to certain minerals being exported to certain countries, etc. So these are countries wanting to think about the minerals that will go into the green transition, whether it's cobalt, whether it's copper, etc., and to ensure that this benefits the continent and their countries. Now, this resonates with the Climate Justice Charter Movement strategic perspectives around the climate justice bloc. One element of that is a climate justice deal for Africa. And if you read our document, we talk about African countries working as a collective unit now to really kind of marshal their resources and position their collective voice around the pricing of these resources, bargain using those resources vis-a-vis the global north for climate debt, reparations, loss and damage, etc. The second and last point that I want to make is that we are only calibrating this proposition around the national elections. Actually, we were not ready during the local government elections, but many of the comrades on this panel and others that we should have invited but couldn't make it, they did test local government elections. The Makanda Front, I spoke to Ayanda. He would have been here, but he has some personal challenges at the moment. Comrade Davine and her activist corps tested local government elections. Comrade Bukani tested local government elections. There's another comrade Pumzile. He won his ward by 85% of the votes. He whacked the ANC in rural Eastern Cape. There are activists in the CJCM space that have gone further around local government power structures. And again, we have been lagging behind in terms of trying to align and try to figure out where we position. So this particular proposition is just for national government. We don't have, we got to think carefully about capacity. We got to think very carefully about resources, and we've got to try and do something that's doable. So yes, as Comrade Thulani says, we don't want to overinflate expectations. This tactic is really a modest tactic, and that's in the document. Read it, comrades, share it, and we will be culminating this debate at the October conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Vish. I want to thank all our panelists for availing themselves. Thank you, comrades, for attending. The electoral tactic document is on the chat. We'll also put it up on the CJCM webpage. This recording is going to be on our COPEC YouTube channel. I've also put the link in the chat, comrades, for those who want to join the Climate Justice Charter movement as we deepen and accelerate the deep just transition. There's also a link on the chat to the CJCM strategic perspectives. So thank you so much, comrades, for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, everyone.